Hello and welcome to the Help is Here podcast, brought to you by the Beyond Compulsion Academy. My name's Thomas Molyneux, I'll be your host, and this is Emma. Emma, before we begin, how do you pronounce your surname?
Cerutti.
Cerutti. I think I might have asked you that before, but I was going to introduce you as Emma Cerutti or something. I was like, may as well just
Emma
ask.
Cerutti.
Yeah, Emma Cerutti. Thanks a lot for coming on. Do you want to start by introducing yourself? Maybe just share what you're up to at the moment. Obviously studying for your masters. We met at the Buddhist Centre, and anything else really that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. So, who am I? I am really interested in exploring the mind, exploring emotional maturity, and just pushing life and our concept of what it means to be here in such a short amount of time as a really valuable exploration. So I've been doing Buddhism or studying Buddhist philosophy for a couple of years now. I've been into spirituality a little bit longer than that, and recently I've started my more formal studies to qualify as a psychotherapist. And on the side of that, I'm also an entrepreneur. I have my own marketing company, and yeah, I just want to bring good to the world, support people in becoming their best selves, and I really enjoy conversations, so I'm really happy to be on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I was having a chat at the cafe the other week, and I was just like, oh my god, like we have covered so much. Like the conversation just got deep very fast, as it usually does with you. Yes. And I was like, oh, I would absolutely love to have you on the podcast. And I was just like, yeah, let's do it. So, maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, and here we are.
Yeah.
So how long have you been interested in exploring the world, exploring the mind, exploring emotional maturity? Have you always been like that, or has that curiosity developed over time?
I was definitely always quite a misfit growing up. The sort of topic of death came quite a lot for me, just in terms of like realizing that I remember being in high school and just having this like sense of, I don't know when I'm going to die. I don't know if I'm going to get an illness or something. So actually from quite a young age, I was quite adamant on like, how can I make the most out of my time here? And also being around people as, a young child, I would sort of realise that how people were going about things and outlashes and like having emotional, just outbursts. I'm like, what's going on? Are you okay? Kind of thing. So I'd say I've always had this interest and curiosity in people and why they're acting the way they are, and kind of an ability to like read between the lines, which I find really valuable. And it's only as I've gotten older and as I've sort of carved my way, out of my own confusion of what do I want out of life, who am I, like, through university you get into a partying phase and the world is just so like expansive, you can do anything, and I feel like that can feel quite restricting also in a way, because you're like, which path do I go down? So it's only after graduating in lockdown and a couple of years of just feeling like I don't have a grasp of life, I don't know where I want to go, but the thing that kept coming back is I love connecting with people and getting to like the depth of like communication. I've never been able to do surface level talk. It's just, it makes me so uncomfortable.
I love that, because you've kind of got this paradox where we have this world nowadays where there is so many opportunities and there's so many options, and it can be a bit bewildering at times. What do I do with my time? How do I live my life? And you've got that, but then also this real sort of perspective on death and that reality, and knowing that I am going to die, and I feel like we're already getting into existentialism pretty quickly here, so maybe I should just move the conversation in a different direction. But I do think there is something in that thought process, that idea, and just having that in your mind around death, like being really aware of death is so valuable, and it's not talked about a lot.
Yes, and not necessarily as a scary thing of like this, as you say, sort of existentialist of like, what I'm so scared of. Like, it's not that. It's actually bringing beauty to the amount of time we have here, and just growing a passion for, if we're not here for a long time, how can we make this the best experience it can be? And I find that such a gift, as opposed to people who never think about, who kind of like have this illusion that they're going to live forever. Then you stop appreciating the small moments. So I think it's a real gift, actually.
No, 100% agree. And I'd say it's not something I've really talked about too much on this podcast before, but that thought about death has sort of been there for me since like a very young age, due to when I was 12, my mum was diagnosed with cancer. And so it always felt like this big death in our family was lurking, like it was just about to happen. Now, I'm not really sure how, but somehow my mum is still here. She's still got cancer. She's had cancer pretty much this whole time, over the last 14 years. But always having that thought of, is there only a few months left or a few weeks or whatever it is, and thinking about death often has definitely made me consider, I really, really do want to make the most of my life in one way or another. And it kind of gives you that drive to go and pursue things which maybe you would have otherwise put off. Like I said recently to you, finally handing in my notice after procrastinating for a little while. And I think that for me has probably been driven more than anything by going beyond compulsion and growing in confidence, by overcoming addiction. But also from the very start, there's something there about thinking about death and realising, we're not here forever. And a lot of Stoic philosophers would talk about death quite a lot as well, and would, as you say, not think about it in this like kind of gloomy, dark way, but more of, let's make the most of this opportunity of life, because by thinking about death, really what you're doing is thinking about life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like the yin and yang, or the night and day. It's like I was stopped on the street. I was walking my dog around the streets of Manchester, and these 3 girls were very drunk. They were probably uni students, and they stop. They get on the floor cuddling my dog, and one of them says, "Oh, my dog just died." I'm like, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that." And all of them were like, "Oh no, I'm going to cry, I'm going to cry. And they were loving cuddling my dog. And then as we're leaving, the girl turns around and shouts, I love you, dog, please never die. And that really like struck me, and I felt so much love in that moment of course she's going to die one day. And I love her so much, and that will cause me so much pain. But to kind of be in this belief of like, we're here forever, everything will last, like it's denial, then you don't get to experience a sort of beauty in the moment. And as you say, the beautiful story of your mum, and I'm really glad she's still here.
Thank you. Do you think humans deny things often, and is there anything else you can think of that humans deny, which actually if they didn't deny, they would be in a better position in their life, or like they generally be happier?
Absolutely. So I'm really glad you asked this. In Buddhism, there are 3 main poisons that they talk about. So in order to live the most amplified and expansive life, you need to be aware of these only three things that are keeping you from it, which is greed, wanting more of something, never being satiated. You want more money, you want more friends, you want a better lover, whatever it is. Hatred, so wanting less of something. I don't want this stress, and I don't want grey mornings, whatever it is. You want less of something. And the third is delusion. It's ignoring that something inherently exists. So a big one is death, pretending that death doesn't exist. It can also be you're talking to someone, you're connecting, but you're ignoring that they've really hurt you in the past. You're not over it, but you still feel resentment towards them, and you don't feel comfortable enough bringing it to them or sharing part of your heart that is still hurting. That's another example. But it's so common. We do it all the time without even knowing. It's like, there's some work that I need to do that I'm procrastinating. I'm deluded that doesn't exist, and I need to do that. And the more we think about our compulsive mind in this way of these 3 things, want more of, want less than, or pretend it's not there, then we will suffer. And this is what Buddhism says. Wow,
I love that so much. It's so interesting, and it's very in alignment with what we teach, because the first thing that we teach is you are wanting to engage in this compulsive behaviour. So where a lot of our clients, they go wrong at the very start, or our listeners, they're going wrong when it comes to addiction, is they're denying the wanting. So I remember when I was struggling with porn addiction and other compulsive behaviours, I would often try and get away from that wanting And that right there is a really good example of delusion, because at that point I did have addicted neural pathways. My brain had changed and I was having these cravings. Like, I was wanting to look at porn. Like, I just did. I mean, the amount of dopamine that's released from looking at porn is crazy. And you talk about it from maybe like an evolutionary perspective, and that isn't always that helpful, because it can make people feel a bit helpless. Like, how do I deal with this innate desire, which, yeah, I mean, you are going to have sexual desires, but what's happened is the brain's wired to porn, and that can be disconnected and rewired, so that can be changed. But I think once it is wired and, you know, you do have these cravings to look at porn, that is wanting, like, you are wanting something, and that desire can't be satiated either, which is another word you used. And I think, for me anyway, when I was in the addiction, it kind of felt like if I have that wanting, I'm going to get out of control and I am going to look at porn. And that's why I'd avoid that wanting. But that was living in delusion, because it was only ever, you know, temporary escape from this desire. And when I learned to deal with the desire and actually connect to it, that was when I was able to change the neural pathways and live this life of freedom that I now have. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on any of that as a bit of a outsider. I know outsider from the, you know, the Beyond Compulsion method, like I've not shared too much about this yet, but I know you're quite interested in it all as well.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating about this moving away from wanting, because, and I think what stood out to me from what you said is an importance of realizing that there isn't a unified you. Right? There are multiple parts within you. One part really wants to engage in the compulsive behaviour, and there's another part that knows that that's not good for you and doesn't want that for you. And this sort of internalized dichotomy of I want it and I don't want it at the same time. And it's just holding place for both of those things to exist without feeling shame for one or for the other. Because I think as soon as we feel a sense of disappointment within ourselves that we should have done better, we shouldn't have engaged in that, we shouldn't have, whatever it is, picked up that drug you like, or the porn, or the comfort food, or pick up work again when you're not meant to. If you feel shame in that moment, I feel like that is really unproductive, and there needs to be a space for compassion, for understanding, or for just, maybe just seeing that you're human and you're going to make mistakes. I feel like that can already melt the sort of defences and all this tightness that we can feel when engaged in an addictive behaviour.
Yeah, we call it the constant conflict, like this constant wanting, but then also this constant wanting to stop. And I remember when Mary first taught me this whole method, she gave me this like really cool exercise where I wrote down on a bit of paper, I'm wanting to engage my compulsive behaviour. And then I also wrote down, like, I want to stop my compulsive behaviour. And what I was doing is I'd put my hand over one line so I could just see one, and then I'd put my hand over the other line and I could just see the other. And I was just like kind of putting my hand over each one, and I kind of had this conclusion in my mind, like, oh, wait, hang on. Both of these things are true simultaneously. And that was the problem that I just hadn't, like, understood, is that actually, as you say, like, both can exist. And if you hold that space for both to exist, and you have some compassion for yourself, and you maybe let go of some of the shame for the wanting, then you're going to be in a much better place to actually deal with this problem instead of just pushing it away and resisting. Because if you push away the wanting, it's going to always come back anyway. So you're just denying that reality of addiction. And then eventually you're going to get to a position where you feel so terrible having this wanting that you are just going to give in and engage because you want to get rid of the wanting. And that seems like the only way in that moment.
And it feels like such a good example of engaging in behaviours that aren't good for you because you feel bad about doing things that you don't feel good about doing. And it's like the same if, like, I don't know, you eat a lot of junk food and you're trying to eat healthy, but you have a relapse, I guess you could say. You eat like 2 McDonald's in a week or whatever it is, and then you're like, you know, screw this, I'm gonna eat like all the terrible things for me now. And I think it's there's something about the evolution thing that you said before about, in a sense, you can say that it's natural or something. Let me just see if I've lost
just
my
on
train
that
of
point,
thought.
it's right. Because what I would say is that for a long, long time, I would talk about things from an evolutionary perspective, because I thought it kind of made sense for me. It kind of helped me understand why I was engaging in these behaviours that I didn't want to engage in, and that helped me reduce some of that shame, because it was like, oh, actually, from a scientific perspective, maybe all of this makes sense. But then I got to a point, through the help from Mary Porlis, to realise that actually seeing things through this evolutionary lens isn't always actually helpful. And I think you then have to start to question, like, is this thought pattern helpful or unhelpful? And if you start excusing your behaviours by, well, from an evolutionary perspective, obviously I'm going to crave a McDonald's, it's like, well, actually, is that thought pattern helpful if you're then doing something that you don't want to be doing? And the alternative to that is, yeah, maybe I'm going to want to have that McDonald's, but that still doesn't mean, you know, evolutionary perspective or not, it doesn't mean that I'm going to engage in that. Like, I think humans have the capacity and the ability to deal with their cravings way more than is portrayed. And I think the media and marketing has a massive, massive influence on how much power we feel we have over our own choices.
Absolutely. And I was listening to a podcast by Michael Singer, who's written amazing sort of spiritual books, and he was talking about smoking as an example, and this marketing thing that you're bringing up of like nicotine patches. What a great promotion to tell people that they can't do it themselves, that they need this product in order to do it, that they're not strong enough to stop this compulsive behaviour on their own. It's like, it's genius, because they're making you forget that you can do it, you know, and in a way it can be simpler than we think it is, but we don't think highly enough of ourselves to have control over our thoughts and our actions, when actually we do. Yeah,
exactly. Like, those pouches are there to essentially give people a way of dealing with a different addiction, but actually that way of dealing with the addiction is never going to be replacing it with a different addiction. You know, it's just substitution. And we have like vaping nowadays, which seems to be another massive addiction impacting loads of people. But again, it's just replacing one nicotine addiction with a different nicotine addiction. So people are just kind of going around in circles, going from one compulsion to another, because it's being marketed to them as a solution, when actually the solution is in our mind. It's not in an external marketed product that makes a company a load of money.
Yeah. And it's, as you say, the addiction can change. We can go from one thing or another, but there is a common thread. And there is a feeling that we're escaping from. And we're using anything we can to escape a feeling. And the avoiding or the delusion, as we were talking about, is so familiar, or there is something familiar in why we're doing it. Otherwise we wouldn't do it if it doesn't bring us some comfort. So I think it's going beyond the addiction itself and saying, why did this start in the first place? You know, like, you talk a lot about porn addictions, but it can be any other addiction. But it's like, usually I think an addiction like that starts in really formative years. Usually people are 13, 14 when they first come across it. And it's like, your life is changing so much during that time, and you feel like you don't have control of your life because you're dependent on others, your hormones are everywhere. So I think it's really important and fascinating to go back to, okay, now you're dealing with this addiction, but why did it start in the first place, and what were you trying to soothe and comfort yourself with?
Yeah. In terms of overcoming the addiction, how does going back to the start and understanding why you got addicted in the first place, how does that help someone then overcome it, in your opinion?
If I can generalize the question, right? Because I'm not an addiction expert, like you.
I appreciate that.
But for example, you know, I'm quite active in therapy environments, and I'm studying counselling myself. And there is a framework of thinking of people who just go down the life coach setting, and those coaches are quite adamant of like, don't think about the past, that's done. Let's move ahead. Let's deal with what we have and move ahead. I think in that paradigm, what's missing for me, and why I really like person-centered therapy in particular, is getting the opportunity to develop a compassion for what you have been through. Because I think there is always an inner child within you. There is a part of you where those experiences haven't left you. They still live in there, which is why sometimes we can get triggered, right? And being triggered is your body not being able to distinguish between your history and the present moment. So if something were to trigger me right now, I would forget that I'm in this room and this microphone's in front of me and I'm speaking to you. I wouldn't be here anymore. I would be living my past.
Yeah.
And my heart would beat out of my chest. You know, you go into fight or flight. And I think not revisiting that and only dealing with symptoms of, okay, your heart's beating, take a few deep breaths, for example, takes away the power that your mind has and is still carrying that hasn't been felt. And you can go your whole life avoiding feeling painful feelings, and you don't realise it, and you've lived your life running away from something, and something that you can absolutely hold and be safe holding. And I think in doing that, you don't suppress. That doesn't become it doesn't become suppressed, repressed, and then it won't find other ways of expressing itself in your life because you've held that. You're not scared of it anymore, and you can actually move on with your life.
Yeah. So is it about safety in a way? Because again, this is like coming up with a bit of science, because I got into a lot of the stuff that you're talking about here and found it really, really interesting, to be honest. And I, read quite a few books on it. And what I learned is that, we have like implicit memory, and what's happening is it's like the amygdala gets activated, and the amygdala's activated to keep us safe. It's like this small almond-shaped sort of part of the brain where essentially it goes into fight or flight, right? And it gets triggered by these memories or these thoughts or these feelings that we once had when we were younger. And when we were younger and we were in that experience, so let's say for me, we go back to like 12 years old, mum's got cancer, got this fear that maybe she's going to leave the family. And that's like really, really scary for me. And so, go 10 years later, I'm 22, let's say I'm with a girlfriend, and then she says she might break up with me or something like that. Maybe that feeling comes back up again because the amygdala gets activated, and it triggers this memory, and there's all of this going on. And so I'm back in the fight or flight mode like I was when I was 12. So now in that moment, let's say I'm not with the girlfriend at that moment, I'm on my own, we're messaging, she's saying certain things that is creating this anxiety. Now I'm wanting to crave, I'm wanting to look at porn, and I've got this craving to look at porn. And I don't think that situation actually ever happened, but something like that, similar sort of situations would happen in the past. And I think, okay, you can understand why in the very first place you got into porn, and you can understand how that kind of helped you back then and have that compassion for yourself. But then I think in that moment now as an adult, with all these like intense emotions where you don't feel safe because you're back in this feeling that you're like a 12-year-old and you've got like your parent about to leave you, which feels very unsafe. It's like, okay, well, what do we do in that moment now? And I think that's where we come in with a very specific script to help people actually think through that choice in that moment and help them sort of re-engage the prefrontal cortex and like the rational part of their brain again, and really empower them to realise that, even in that moment where you are feeling the most intense pain ever, you don't have to just hold on to that pain and feel it. Instead, you can change your thought patterns so that you don't continue to feel that. And I think that's where there's a lot of breakthroughs for people, because instead of just feeling with it and feeling safe and then having that discomfort again come up again in the future and again and again and again, what we're doing is we're changing people's thought patterns in those moments so they don't have to continue living like this for the rest of their life, where every time they have like some intense emotion, they're like potentially going to go and engage in a compulsive behaviour and escape it. It's like, actually, hang on, that no longer serves me that path. Instead, I'm going to maybe choose to deal with this in a different way.
And what is that different way? What do you sort of encourage people to, how do you change their thinking?
I think the main thing is quite similar to what you said, is willingly accepting temporary discomfort. To do that, you need a thorough education, in my opinion, on addiction. You need to really kind of understand that you can engage in this and that you have these options, and then think through the options and then make your choice. We teach 5 facts, and to learn like each one of these facts, there's hours of content really. So it does take some time, and what we'd always recommend someone do is, take the full education first rather than just learn the facts, because what's going to happen is, if like I was just to say like all 5 facts now on the podcast, which I could do, what would happen is people would then write out their own scripts. They listen to it, create their own scripts. And then what's going to happen, and I know this because I've seen it happen, is they're then going to continue to engage in the compulsive behaviour because something called junkie thinking is going to get in the way. They're not going to know how to actually read out the script effectively, do it in the right way. And they're going to have certain rationalizations, excuses, justifications to engage in their compulsive behaviour. And so that's one of the main reasons why we like to actually talk with the client first, have what we call a liberation day call, which takes place after they've taken, a few hours of content, wrote down quite a lot of notes. And then they have a call with us to build out a personalised script for them. And then they'd go and utilise and use this script every time they have an urge. But there's also what we call unanswerable questions and script resistance. So there's quite a few different things that go on which is going to get in the way of someone actually using the script effectively. But what I would say to anyone listening to this is that the main thing is you want to have the ability to deal with urges and not continue escaping them. And there's lots of ways to deal with those urges in the right way, one of which is, of course, beyond Compulsion Academy, but I'm sure there's other stuff out there as well.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I really appreciate what you're saying, that, if someone is in the addictive mindset, it's almost like you're playing with the devil, right? So like you've grown the confidence and you've broken past thinking that you can't overcome it, so you've actually gone to look for resources. You've said, okay, I have a potential issue, let me figure out how to get control of it, which is already a massive win. And then you start playing with the devil of like, there's something that's really triggering for you, and if you get some information, but that sort of devil mindset is in control in that moment, it can convince you that, hey, this, you figured it out, well done, now let's get back to that thing. So it's really important. I think it highlights the power of having people to lean on when you're quite vulnerable, in a vulnerable state. And also I like what you said about understanding addiction, because I think we can feel quite alone in dealing with behaviours, and we can think, why the hell am I doing that? Like, I should know better. I shouldn't be falling into that trap. I can't be like everyone else. But if you understand that addiction is so much bigger than you, and it's a thing that affects so many people, maybe everyone, we were talking about earlier in a conversation, and just kind of, I wonder if it's like just releasing some pressure or releasing some control and having people that you can rely on that can help you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you have like the 12 steps approach, where I think one of the first steps, I've never actually taken 12 steps or know much about it, so I probably shouldn't bring it up, but I think one of the steps is about sort of submitting and accepting that you are powerless in the face of the addiction or something along those lines. And what I would say is, you mentioned the word, the addiction being so much bigger than you or something along those lines. And I think it can be, if you don't have the right education on it. I think once you have the right education on addiction, you can see that all of these thoughts and the way in which it works, or like the ploys, tactics and deceptions that the devil as such would use, are all just part of the addiction, and it's not even that scary. So we use an analogy where we talk about the man behind the curtain, and it's a bit like the Wizard of Oz. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but you've got like this guy behind the curtain who seems almighty, all powerful and scary, but actually when you understand the addiction, it's not that scary after all, because you can see that, oh yeah, one way or another, what's going on for me right now is the addiction is just trying to do what it's always trying to do. It's trying to get me to engage in this compulsive behaviour. And I have a choice, and I have a way of dealing with that choice. And then you think through the choice and you make your decision, and then you just move on and you carry on with your life. And I think that is the thing, is it's kind of finding this balance of accepting that, dealing with an addiction is really difficult and it is so prevalent. I think most people nowadays are dealing with an addiction of some kind, but also you're not powerless in the face of it, and it is possible to overcome it. But I think it's really important that you do understand it and realise all these different sort of tactics and ways in which it will try and deceive you in different ways, because once you understand that, it's like you're back in control. Now you're the powerful one.
Amazing.
You know, you're in the driving seat.
Yeah.
So yeah, you talked earlier about shame and compassion, which I totally agree is such a big thing here when it comes to quitting porn or any addiction really. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on how can people become more compassionate with themselves when they are dealing with an addiction?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
And I just want to come back to something you said really quickly about sort of growing, an awareness that it kind of sounded like befriending the addiction by saying, oh, that's how my mind's going to work, or there's the addiction again. And I think this ties in really well with compassion, to befriend this thing that you're struggling with and to recognize it, not so much as this thing that's back and I don't want it, go away, this hatred poison that we were talking about. Yeah. If we can accept that we are struggling with something and accept that our mind is conditioned to want to find safety, and our mind is conditioned to want control, and engaging in familiar patterns is one of the easiest ways our thinking mind, can convince us that we have control over our surroundings, right? And to just acknowledge the mind doing that and not push it away, but say, oh, hello, old friend. Like, I see that I've noticed this urge within me to engage in that thing, and have a conversation with it. Say, like, thank you for trying to keep me safe, but maybe I don't need you right now. Or maybe I'm going to do something first, create some space between you and the thing without shame in it, and say, oh, the mind's doing the mind thing. I might come back to it. You might do. Or you might say, not right now.
Yeah.
You know?
I think having a non-judgmental awareness of that craving and that desire is so essential to actually overcoming this for good. Because if every time you have that urge, that desire, you're just judging yourself in that moment, then you, one way or another, you are resisting it. You're going to be pushing it away. And by pushing the desire away, the other thing is you're not actually going to ever change that neural pathway of desire. You're never going to learn that you can deal with it. And as you said earlier, you know, actually sitting with that discomfort. And I know you do a lot of meditation and have been on retreats, so I'm sure you know the power of that. You know, by dealing with that discomfort and willingly accepting it, not just pushing it away every time it comes up, you can really feel empowered and trust yourself that you can deal with anything that comes your way. And I feel like that is one of the best benefits of overcoming any addiction, because when I used to be in it, I remember I would put my phone in the locker at work, I'd go back to my flat and I'd just stay busy, relentlessly working or doing all kinds of things, like maybe going to the gym or making sure I was busy socialising or cooking a meal. And it's like my brain was so frantically busy that I never gave myself permission to just sit and maybe read a book or chill out or just not really do anything. And I think this is the problem that we have nowadays, is most people are staying busy so often because they're so terrified of what they might do if they actually let their mind loose, essentially.
Totally.
You know?
That's it. I think that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And we are scared to feel. Because at some stage, I don't know if it came from someone else or it came from ourselves, that we started thinking, I can't sit with this. This is going to eat me up. I will start spiraling if I just feel how my heart feels. If I just feel the anxiety, that is devastating. I can't do that. I need to do anything to keep this away from me. And you forget that you're powerful. You can sit with it. And a beautiful meditation practice, or why I always come back to meditation, is detaching yourself as a whole being from just being your mind. You know, you talked about the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and sort of brain functions. And like, they're just thoughts. And what meditation does, and I encourage anyone watching or listening to this to try, is to drop into the body. Your body has so much information, so much knowledge and wisdom about how you are doing in this moment right now, and your mind will do anything it can to cast you back to the past, cast you forward to the future, be anywhere but right now, and to actually just sit in your body, when you're having a good day or when you're having a bad day, and just feel like, oh, my chest feels quite tight, or maybe my throat is constricted, or there's tingling in my hands, whatever the actual direct experience is, just be with that. And your mind, you'll notice, it's quite unavoidable, will start coming in and say, oh, it's because you've got this to do, or oh, because this, or oh, that person hasn't replied, or oh, you still need to get back, whatever. And as soon as you can say, oh, I'm thinking, if you can think, oh, I'm thinking, you have broken through so many barriers of this deception that is who we are and that's all we'll ever be. If there is a person perceiving the thought, then you are inherently not that thought, and you can regain control again. And it's just amazing, like, if you engage in any meditation practice, you'll quite probably be frustrated that you can't stop thinking. And the best advice I ever got about meditation, it's not about not thinking. It's not about having a clear mind. That's not what good meditation is. The breakthrough of meditation is you're focusing on your breath, or you're focusing on a sensation, say your hands, your thoughts start. And if you can say, oh, I am thinking, you are checking out of that TV show and you're realizing that you're watching TV, if that makes sense. And you just gain so much control over not spiraling thoughts on the feeling you're feeling, which might be anxiety. If you can just feel it, you can say, it's just a tingling in my chest. Or where is it? How does it feel? And it can just be that, without the thoughts and the reasoning and the excuses. It can just be a feeling, and you are more than capable to sit with that without running away from it and finding something that will dull that feeling.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think from the perspective of addiction, there's quite a few things here to talk about, because I used to take the approach of using meditation as a way to deal with urges and the desire. And I'd do an hour of meditation every day. And I would come on the podcast, and it used to be called the Finally Quit Porn podcast. And I would talk about how that was like the best method, essentially, to quit porn, is to deal with that discomfort. And to do so, you would, just observe what's going on instead of being so involved and part of it. And you have some more space from that thought. And I remember this exercise that was on one of these apps that I was trying to use to quit porn. And it talked about, imagine being out at sea and you're in the ocean and you've got these waves. And when you're dealing with urges, it's like these waves are just coming quick and fast, and, they're relentless. And what you want to do is try imagine yourself above the wave. So 10 yards up in the air above yourself. Like, imagine you're just observing this wave crashing against you. Now, I sort of took that approach, and it kind of worked for me for a little while. But what I find interesting is that when I think about addiction now, how I see it is, it's like that guy was in the water because he was on the beach, and maybe the tide had come in and swept him out to sea. What I believe now is that people have the option to go onto that beach or not. It's like people have the option to not only be observing of the desire and the urge, but actually change the desire and the urge. And it's almost like finding a way to not be hit by these waves anymore, because you've almost changed these waves by dealing with them in the right way. So I'm not really sure if that analogy actually makes sense. Yeah, maybe that's it. Build a surfboard. Although there's actually a thing called urge surfing, which is like a legitimate tactic for dealing with urges. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe that analogy isn't really making sense. But
I hear what you're saying about changing the conditions and the stimulus that would usually make you fall. So if it's going to the beach, the waves might be there. Is that what you're saying? I think I've really just messed up that analogy entirely. If I'm truly honest, I think let's just bin that analogy entirely. I'm gonna reframe it. So I think what it's like is, you're getting hit by these waves and you are going to have to deal with them. But there's a way to think through the waves so that the waves no longer exist in the future. And I think just going above and observing them is going to be effective temporarily, but you're going to stay in the addiction. Like, if you do meditation to deal with addiction,
you're going to keep on getting hit by the waves because you're not actually changing the thought patterns. And I think there isn't any correct analogy for this, but I think what it comes down to is instead of feeling and sort of temporarily accepting some discomfort regularly, you can actually retrain the brain by changing how you think so that you no longer have to deal with those feelings, if that makes sense.
Okay. I see what you're saying. I would challenge some of that, which I've noticed you saying stop the feeling and think. And I almost want to challenge the opposite. Stop thinking and feel. So that we come to the same conclusion that we're both pointing towards, of change how things are going about. There is a way to get out of suffering. But yeah, it's an interesting analogy, and I think whether waves are coming or they're not, I think that's out of your control, like in terms of external stimulus. Like if you're spending time on the internet, you will have adverts pop up, and you can decide to put your phone away, but then something might come up in a film that might trigger you, or whatever it is. You don't have control over anything outside of yourselves, but you do have control over your own boundaries and where you place yourself and what you decide you're going to engage in. And I think it's really important to feel like you have control over yourself. And I think one thing that I would introduce or offer in the conversation is this idea of creative energy, which, if we're so close to the problem, we get stuck in habit. It's like we have no time to react, and then the same thing is going about again and again. So this could be if someone, is struggling with anger, for example, if that's something that they can't control and they're in like conflict, if they don't have space in that moment, they will just re-engage and go, because they don't have time to even realize they're doing it. But to have something like meditation, it could be something different if you don't like to meditate, creating something that, whether it's counting to 3 before you respond, having that literal space so that you can think, how am I feeling? What is going on right now? Introduce some self-awareness instead of jumping right into reaction. I think that can have a really big effect on what we do, what we engage in, how we communicate with others, because we have space to react creatively and not be stuck in our usual way of dealing with things. Yeah,
I think that's where fact one for us would come in, where it's like, I'm wanting to engage my compulsive behaviour right now. Even just being aware that you're having this desire is so powerful. And like you say, it really is about increasing your awareness of what's going on for you so that you have more space to make a better informed decision and think through the choice rationally. I think a better metaphor for me to sort of use to explain my approach around all of this is, in an addiction, what I'd say is it's a bit like you've got a car going downhill and you actually have to take action to get this car stop rolling backwards down a hill about to crash. And I think observing a car rolling downhill is just going to lead to the car crashing time and time again. And I think if you observe the thoughts and feelings and you detach from them, it is still a bit like letting that car roll down the hill and just like letting it happen. Whereas the alternative is, actually, I could choose to, restart the car and move uphill again. And it's going to be a lot more effort and it is going to be difficult at times, but I can change the direction of this car entirely and I'm empowered to do that. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I from what you're saying, I'm getting a feeling of empowerment, of you do have choice. When I guess it's also kind of the exploration about freedom of choice, right? If you think that you're a free agent in this world, you can absolutely change how you act. Whereas I think if you're in sort of a victim mentality, for a lack of a better word, and you're surrounded by people who just watch their cars go down the hill, then you're not going to realize you have that option to change. So I think it is really important to feel empowered, to take control of your life and to not fall into a powerlessness or something like that.
Yeah, consent to helplessness, and just let the addictive part of the mind sort of rule you and take over when there is an alternative. But I think you've really got to take the reins and actually be proactive and have this stance where you're attacking, not defending. And I think that's the slight difference, where you see an urge as an opportunity to change the brain, instead of seeing the urge as this thing that you've just kind of got to go through, like this difficult obstacle that you got to just, accept some discomfort. It's like, actually, every urge is an opportunity to change how you think, and therefore change how you feel, and therefore change how you act.
Yeah.
So you can make a massive change in your life.
And I think it's your surroundings, your conditions, your environment, your community play such a big role in that. And I would say, I don't know how big that is a part in your course, but the people, your network is so important to have people who believe in you to change and actively want you to change. Because I know there are some sort of friendship groups where it's all about making fun of each other or pressing each other's buttons, or people who don't want to change, people who don't dream bigger about their life, and they are happy being in their addiction. There's a big drinking problem in this society, and drug problems, and people think it's funny, and if you're surrounded by people who think it's funny, then it's the hardest thing you could possibly do, almost impossible, I would say, if you want to stay with that group of friends and have a better life for yourself. And I also want to honour how difficult and scary it is to feel like you're starting from zero again. If you have safety in numbers, but you don't feel safe within yourself, you have to risk so much in order to find a better life for yourself. And for anyone listening who is scared of this, I really want to offer the possibility that you can absolutely create the best circle around you, a life for yourself where you're really proud of how you're acting in each moment. I know from being like a misfit all my life to losing friends along the way, but following my intuition and what is important to me and the kind of life I want for myself, I could not be happier where I am with the people around me. People who support me, want the best for me, challenge me, inspire me. That's who I want everyone to be around.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. First thing I'll say is, and then I really want to delve into this more, because I'm really interested in how you sort of created more of a friendship group that aligns with who you are, and, who are probably valuing what's unique about you and your listening skills and just everything about you, really, that makes you great to talk to. But before we get into that, I do want to say as well, the thing about being in a surrounding area where there's like people in addiction, and maybe everyone there is kind of like just having a laugh and they're normalizing addiction. That's what we see often. So I've actually had a client who recently left the program. He wanted more one-on-one with me, but he was asking for like a really low price, and I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And he was like, well, can I join the program if I get some of my friends to join as well, and then do it on a lower price? And again, I was like, no, it's not going to happen. Like, this is the price, take it or leave it. And essentially, he was saying how, quite a lot of his mates also had this addiction. And I think what can happen is that people can have a porn addiction, and then it become normalized because all their friends also have a porn addiction or whatever addiction it is. And what can happen though when you're in an addiction is you have all this junky thinking that, well, they're doing it, so it's fine, it's not that big of a problem, it's okay. But what we often talk about is how that's just minimizing the consequences, because if everyone's jumping off a cliff, does it make it okay for you to jump off a cliff? And I think it's really important to realize that no matter what everyone else in the world's doing, you always have your choice. No one's ever going to take away that choice from you. Like, it's always going to be there. And so what we would probably say is that the junky thinking could come up for people that, well, I can't deal with this addiction, or this is too hard for me because all my friends are also engaging in it. But what I would argue is, well, that's just going to be another way the addictive part of the mind is going to try and convince you to engage through some kind of justification, rationalization, or whatever it may be. But also, again, from the other lens, if you're around people who are addicted all day long, it is, I totally agree, it is going to be more difficult. And I think your environment can can make a difference. And if it didn't, we wouldn't have certain areas in society where way more people are addicted than elsewhere. And I think that is due to it being normalised in certain places. But yeah, going back to you, I do really want to ask you, so how have you ended up making so many more new friends who are like-minded and like yourself, and, you know, really have this sort of drive and energy towards like making their life pretty awesome and having deep conversations and finding more meaning in your life? That's a big question, but can you tell us more about that?
Let me think. I think there's definitely a big tie to what you just said about, you know, sort of the community you're in and still having agency, even if people are doing it, and not to fall into that victim mentality. I think part of what's helped me is, in a way, the great pain that I was feeling from engaging in meaningless conversations. That's me, right? So for someone else, it could be an addiction towards something else. But I realised how deeply unhappy and unsatisfied I was being around certain people. And I think there's a really strong need that everyone has for belonging, right? That is a really deep motivator in our day-to-day life. We want to belong, we want to feel safe. So that needs, you know, a high pedestal, I guess, in how we lead our life. And the fact that I was so unhappy, even being around a lot of people, I just didn't feel peace. And what happened in my life was I was in a really toxic relationship, right? I was getting emotionally just like hit into the ground with like narcissistic partner and just like very mentally abusive. And I ended up thinking really little of myself. You know, a lot of that sort of mental abuse had made me really small. And it wasn't until I found some strength from somewhere to leave that situation and start from nothing, start from scratch again. This was during the lockdowns as well, so like very isolating time. To reach rock bottom was such a blessing, to reimagine everything, because now I had nothing to lose. So I think if someone is really lost, if you have nothing to lose, that is the best time to start fresh. Actually lose everything. Lose those friends. Lose those negative influences. And I started regaining a relationship with myself. This is around the same time that I started personal therapy. I started meditating. I started just finding out what I liked in life. You know, I started taking some surfing classes. I started like playing the drums, just anything I wanted to, I let myself do, because now no one could tell me that wasn't cool, or no one could have an opinion about it, because I was so alone. And from there, I think putting yourself out your comfort zone is so powerful. So I started, I had one friend who I only worked with her for like 4 weeks. I was on a contract at the time. And she'd said, oh, there's some like, there's a spiritual circle going on. Do you want to try? And I thought, oh my God, that sounds like a cult. What the hell? But I thought, hey, I'll try it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And I started like finding like connections with people like I'd never had before. And I just stayed open to opportunities, and I started finding people who dreamed bigger about life, which is what I really resonated. Like, what we see in front of us isn't so black and white. Like, there's more, you can explore more, you can have deeper conversations. Amazing. And then when I moved to Manchester for work, that group went away because I'd moved away, and I was around people who liked drinking, liked partying, and I experienced that same pain again of like, I don't belong here again. And I think it would have been really easy for me to just get on with it, but I couldn't. And that's what I invite anyone going through something similar. If your heart is feeling like this isn't right for you, don't settle. Like, life can be so expansive, it can be so abundant. Find your people, find people who bring you alive. And spend time there. So that's around the time I asked someone, where can I find some spiritual people, some deep thinkers? And someone said to me, try the Buddhist Center. And I thought, oh, religion, oh, that's scary. That's unsafe. But I put myself out my comfort zone. I just tried. And one of the first conversations I had with someone said to me, do you think there's such a thing as free will? And I was like, I'm sold. I love it here. And yeah, from there, it's been a beautiful combination of people who support me, who genuinely want the best for me. There's no kind of teasing or making fun of each other or passive aggressiveness, which I just really don't like. But it's people who challenge you, say, you know, what's going on for you? Really honest places where you can have real conversations. Mix that amazing supportive community and good inspirational people with not losing sight of myself. The fact that I meditate, the fact that I go on retreats and spend quality time with myself where I'm not afraid to feel any feeling. This past week I've been experiencing such grief and like mourning for a version of myself that I think it's time to let go of. And just to be able to sit with that and not block it away, not distract myself, but feel it fully and cry and, you know, feel really sad, but not be scared of feeling that. Has transformed my life, because I went from honestly crying for days to having these bursts of energy and excitement and happiness and like dancing in my room alone. Like I feel feelings in such depth on both sides of the spectrum, and to me that's what my life is about. It's about not being scared and not dulling any emotion out of fear. That was a long
No, it's an amazing answer, to be honest. Like, I love that, because it sounds like it's been a real journey. And how did you end up ending that first relationship? Because that sounded like that was quite a hard time, and that was kind of the turning point for you in terms of like finding yourself. I know it's a bit cliche, but sort of finding your own independence and seeing your own worth and realising that actually you can venture out and sort of do what you want independently and you don't need anyone else to sort of go on that path.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a really dark time in my life. I remember just one key question that I started asking myself, which changed a lot for me, and it still took me months to leave, but this question was, if I was meeting this person for the first time, would I stick around?
Yeah.
And I think this applies to a partner, or this applies to friends. If you're meeting... Or a job.
Because that's actually partly how I made my decision last week.
Okay.
Same question. But anyway, carry on.
I want to hear about that. But yeah, just asking yourself, without getting into like self-worth or self-respect or these like really key things, but that are hard to access if you're not used to it. If you're meeting this person for the first time, would you ask them to hang out again? And I was proving to myself, I must have asked myself that maybe like 20 times over the course of, say, 3 months. And every time the answer was absolutely not. And I couldn't at that point have resorted to self-love or self-worth or respect. It was just that question. And I started laughing at the answer to that question when it was so obvious. Yeah. But what about you? What about your sort of job?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say how, you know, I said to myself last week, I was like, or the week before, I said, if I didn't have this job right now, would I be looking for a job 3 days a week working in tech as a business development manager? And my answer was no, because I obviously want to run the Beyond Compulsion Academy. So I was like, well, why am I valuing this so highly? And there's something called the endowment effect, which is where, you know, humans have this natural bias to place a greater value on what we already have than what we don't have. And so we are inclined to stay with the things that we're used to and comfortable with. But yeah, how did you actually end up like ending that relationship then? Was that still hard, even though you knew the answer was so obvious to you? Sometimes it can still be hard to actually go, yeah, I need to put an end to this, right?
You know, this is... You're making me think of things I haven't thought about for a long time. No, but I have a beautiful moment to share with you that, you know, we were arguing a lot, you know, and he was in a really bad place.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, I was in a really bad place. And I'd been in the saviour mode of, I can save you. Like, I'll help you through this and then we'll get back to being happy, right? And I was burnt out to the ground. And we were arguing so much. And I don't know if it's a female thing where women will check out mentally of a relationship way before they actually put an end to it.
Yeah.
It's like, if we feel it in our hearts, we'll try and suppress it, but once the idea's there, it's there. And I remember we were sat watching TV, and I felt like this peace all of a sudden. And I said, what is this? And in my head, I was already broken up with him months prior.
Yeah.
But then I just said to him, you know what I've just realised? We're different people. And I feel so much love for you as a person. And I want the best for you. And I know that that's not with me. And I know that I want the best for me. And that's not you. And I said to him, I don't want to feel all this bitterness and anger. I want to feel love. And the only way I can feel love for you is if we're not together.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was that, like, even saying it now, I feel so full of love because I was able to let go of all this, like, armor that I had built that was supposed to keep me safe. And for that to just melt and be like, oh, what I really just want is to feel love. And I'm not feeling it being together. So it was such a loving letting go. And he responded so beautifully. Like, all his armor in that moment melted. And he said, I completely agree. And then, like, we were living together during lockdowns. And for maybe a week or two, we were friends again. It was amazing. And it was also kind of confusing at the time. But everything I wanted with a connection with him came back. And yeah, then he went back to his usual self, and then I was able to say, okay, I'm happy, I'm leaving. Yeah. And I left. And I was really lucky to have my parents to go back to. You know, I think every situation is completely different. But yeah, it was a loving let go, which I think is the best way to mourn the end of anything. And I think, you know, talking about addictions as well, kind of going back to that topic, it's, can you let go of it lovingly? Not fuck you, I never want to see you again, like, you were shit for me. And you know, whether we say that to a person or to a part of ourselves, if we can just melt that in if you're dealing with an addiction, it's, oh, I can see how this addiction kept me safe when I was younger. You know, this allowed me to not feel scared, and I'm really grateful for it. And now I'm an adult, so I can sort of let that go. Sorry, just to add one last thing, there's a beautiful saying that I've heard a lot in Buddhist context, which is there's like this big river, right, that you need to cross. So you'll be on the bank of this river and you'll build yourself a raft to get to the other side. Once you're at the other side and you have a forest to get through, you're not going to bring the raft with you. It helped you cross the river, and now you can let go and move on. And I think with dealing with addiction or things that feel out of your control, it's like, give thanks and give love for what it has provided you up until now. But if you realize it no longer serves you, you can let go of that raft. Yeah,
and I think because of how addiction works, what's going to happen is people are going to glamorize the addiction and try and make it out as if this is something that gave them so much, when I think what actually happens is all it really ever gives someone is that temporary escape from some discomfort. And, you know, you crave it again and again because you've chosen to engage in the past. And I think, like, when you're younger, you get into it and you have no idea about the harm. You have no idea about addiction. Like, it's no one's fault they get addicted to porn. Like, we live in this society where it's totally normalised, and people are getting hooked on it from really, really early ages. I mean, no one ever told me when I was 12 years old that this stuff is like cocaine. Like, it is crazy to think that 12-year-olds nowadays are getting into this stuff. And, you know, you said earlier as well about kind of befriending the addicted part of your mind. I think there is definitely a space there for you to not have too much like compassion with the addicted part of your mind, because you do need to be assertive. You do need to really be like, okay, I'm not listening to your bullshit anymore because this is bullshit. But then at the same time, you don't want to be in some constant conflict, some battle with yourself and being like all frustrated and like, oh, I hate you so much, because that's where I was in the past. Is every single time I engaged, it's like I would just feel so frustrated with myself. Like I'm here again after trying so hard, and I'd be so angry, and then I'd get all this motivation, and it's like I'm never ever doing that ever again. And then like a few days go by or a few weeks go by and I've just done it again. Or even sometimes I'd engage, feel horrendous, like all this self-hatred, and can't even describe how terrible I'd feel. I'd say I'm never doing that again, and like literally 20 minutes would go by and I'm there doing it once again. So I think it is really important to realise that actually all of that motivation isn't always that helpful, because unless you understand how the addictive part of the mind works, and in my opinion, unless you have a tool to actually deal with those urges, you are going to keep on going back to it. Right. And, I think having a bit more space and, letting go of the kind of relentless pressure and drive to overcome it can definitely serve you, because really what you want at the end of the day is peace of mind. Right. That's the thing that people want. Exactly. And if you're in a fight with yourself, you're not experiencing that peace of mind.
And I'd as you were saying that, something like, I felt something around like, what if the addiction isn't the thing, but it's just the addiction to not feel like you're not good enough? Like just that, like feeling you're not good enough to save your parents, or not good enough to save the relationship or to achieve what you want in life. And just that feeling of like, oh, what if I'm not enough? And it makes you like, stop, that's not true. But as you say, if you relapse, if you're not as strong as you want to be around something, it's reinforcing that very thing that you're trying to not feel, which isn't helpful. So I think compassion and self-love is such a key part of breaking free from addiction, because you're proving to yourself, I don't need that drug to feel good enough, because I know I am.
Yeah, and I think the other thing on compassion is that the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself in an addiction is really to overcome the addiction. And I think this is where a lot of people go wrong, is they see compassion as an excuse and a rationalization. It's another junky thought, is, it's okay, I can do this, I've had a really hard day, I deserve this to relax. That's been a common one from our clients. Or I'm really tired, or I've had a tough week at work, whatever it is, so I'm going to engage in this compulsive behaviour. But what we do with our clients is we get them really, really crystal clear on actually how this is harming their life. And when you understand addiction and you see how it is harming your life, you'll realise that the last thing you would want to do to sort of help yourself in any way is to engage in something which makes you feel utterly miserable and tired and exhausted and frustrated and full of shame and exhaust. And I think that's really, really key, is that, the most compassionate thing you can do is to sometimes temporarily accept discomfort and really understand the addictive part of your mind, so that you can overcome this and then really embrace this peace of mind, which feels really good, because then you're no longer in a battle and you have all this space to actually explore what you want to explore and really listen and care about other people and go and do whatever you set out to do,
Yeah, but it's zooming out, right? Because sometimes we're too close to the issue and we just get hyper-focused on the addiction itself. Whereas you say, you zoom out and you see your life in a wider context. And if it makes sense to you, not someone else telling you, but if you realise this doesn't help me achieve what I want, which is probably peace, or it might be happiness, or whatever it is, I agree that's when you can make the change.
Yeah, and you have to really just realise that for yourself and stop denying the reality of this addiction and just be honest with yourself. And I think honesty is going to set a lot of people free in life. I also think you said something earlier about, what if it is that I'm not good enough in some way? The interesting thing in addiction for me is that those thoughts are going to come up very regularly. Thoughts of, am I good enough? Am I doing this right? In terms of like quitting the addiction. And there's going to be all this anxiety and shame and maybe self-hatred and self-deprecation in one way or another. And in the past, I was trying to deal with that in isolation, And that was the detached thing I was trying to deal with, which wasn't in the context of addictive neural pathways and addiction. It was just, I've got all these sort of problems going on in my life, maybe low confidence because of my job or whatever it is, right? What I've come to understand and believe is that actually a lot of the problems that I had around like maybe anxiety, stress, shame, low confidence, they were actually being caused by the addiction as another way to get me to engage in the addiction. Because if the addictive part of your mind can spin you out into a state of helplessness where you don't feel empowered, where you feel like you're a failure, where you feel there's something wrong with you, where you feel like you have some innate sexual desires that are completely out of place, you are going to continue engaging because now you're disempowered and feeling helpless. And so when you can start to see some of that self-deprecation as part of the addiction, you're in a really, really good position to overcome this problem. So that's the other thing I'd just add on as well.
Yeah, and I'd say also this voice that you're talking about, this addictive voice, I would give it the name ego, because the ego wants to show everyone that you are good enough and that you have power and you have control and everyone look at me, I'm great, right? That is ego. And I think in having a part of yourself want to defend you and say, oh, if you're not feeling great, if you just do this, I promise you'll feel great. And you might do for a second or two. But as soon as that's over, you have a crash of the disappointment, the frustration, the anger with yourself. And then here comes the ego. Hey, you're feeling terrible. Come do this. Yeah. And it's like Jim Carrey, who's such a great speaker, very spiritual guy. I saw him give a clip of him giving a talk at university. Yeah. And he says how tricky this ego, that it promises something that we already are.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
It's good. It's good. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's that like people are full, worthy, deserving of love and connection, but then you have this society now where we're bombarded with messages which are basically one way or another trying to pick all our pain points, which usually don't even exist until they're picked apart, and we're told that we need all these things which we don't necessarily need, just so we can be marketed products. And I think that's the problem. And well, it's one of the many problems, and we have this normalization now of addiction where it's just got completely out of control. Everyone's being told they're not good enough on some level, and actually, you're okay as you are. And often the real problem is just some thought patterns which can be changed with the right education and the right tools. When you have that, you can see that a lot of the world out there it's not very helpful, at least for good mental health.
Yeah, that's so important. I think this marketing that you're talking about is, I find, really unethical. If you just buy this skin moisturizer, then you'll be so happy and you'll chat with friends and you'll laugh all the time and whatever. And like they paint a picture really subliminally. They paint a picture of what your life will look like if you just have this product. And then you become addicted with, capitalism and buying more and more and more. And this is where sort of the greed poison comes in, of just unsatisfied. You keep buying, you're like, oh, I thought I was going to be happy now. Oh, next thing. Even people who want to become millionaires, want to buy a Ferrari. They think they'll be happy when they're sitting in a Ferrari because that's all they see, is shown. When actually your happiness doesn't live in something else. And it's the less we need, the happier we are, because we can be happy just as we are without all of these messages that we need something outside of ourselves.
Exactly. I remember once I came up with the quote, we need less than we think more than we need.
Ooh.
And I think that is true, because people nowadays are just thinking all the time and always feeling like they need more, when the reality is that actually a lot of people would benefit from thinking a lot less and maybe just being grounded and present and more in the moment. And also realising that actually they need a lot less than they think they need. Because, people have lived quite happily. Well, a lot of people have lived quite happily for millions of years without very much. And now we have this world of actual real abundance and there's all this stuff, but most of it we don't actually need. And there's a massive difference, like psychologically, in how we feel in the state of wanting to the state of having. So once you actually have something, it's like that sort of dopamine that's going on, which is driving you to want and get the thing that you're trying to get. It kind of disappears. It's the dopamine that drives the behaviour to get the Ferrari, but then once you have the Ferrari, there's nothing to pursue any longer. And that's why so many people, once they sell their business worth like millions, they're not feeling very good after it, because this thing they've worked towards building is now gone. And, you know, there's just this massive difference. And that's why when people are consuming porn, for example, they've got this craving, they're wanting, they engage, they have it, and now they have this drop and they're feeling absolutely terrible again, because they realise that all of that wanting that was going on is leading up to this thing that once they've actually got, it's not giving them anything.
It's such pressure that this one thing will solve your problems and give you happiness, and you will always be disappointed if you're relying on something and you're avoiding your own feelings because you think this isn't happiness, this is all the terrible stuff, happiness, and it's like, no. Yeah. So for you, how do you like sit comfortably through discomfort? What a question. That's great. How do I sit comfortably through discomfort? I think it's hard to answer, but I think part of it is an innate curiosity and an innate questioning of what I think I believe. You know, just like if concepts can be a bit loose, can wiggle about, and they're not these concrete walls of right, wrong, yes, no. If I can add some curiosity into my experience and say, okay, I think sitting with this anxiety will be too much. Let's see if it is, right? And then you can sit with it and disengage the mind. That is such a key part, because your mind, your ego, has all these narratives that have been running for decades, or depending on how old you are. They've been running for a really long time, and they can feel like concrete walls. And if you can stop those narratives that you're so familiar with, right? Suffering is so familiar, and that brings us comfort. And I think that's part of also addictive behaviours that keep us addicted is things hurt. You know, some people jump from toxic relationship to toxic relationship, or they stay with friends that aren't good for them. It's because that feeling of disappointment, of hurt is familiar, and that brings comfort, paradoxically. But to feel things and not label them, this is suffering, this is jealousy, this is sadness, this is grieving. If you can let that go and just, where is it in my body? Okay, so it might be in my chest. Is it spiky? Like, what shape is it? You give it a shape, and then you just sit with, okay, if this is just this feeling in my chest, if this isn't the narrative that I associate with it, is it so bad? Is just this feeling going to cause me to run out the door, get in my car and drive and buy a bottle of vodka, whatever it is? No, it's just a feeling.
Yeah.
And if you can disempower that and empower yourself, then I think you can sit with them.
You know what's quite interesting about that? I've now gone many, many months without porn. I'm not going to say years. It's not been years, unless you define it as porn as in a porn site, because what I was doing is I was looking at sexual content on social media for about 2 years, sort of had the junky thinking of, this is fine, it's not porn, so it's not a problem, which was just how the addiction works. And, you know, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram and these social media platforms looking at sexual content. And then I meet Mary in December 2023, learn the Beyond Compulsion method. And, you know, she taught me the script, and it's helped me stop for good correctly. So what's been interesting for me now is that I still have these feelings from time to time where it is discomfort, but now in my mind, I think because I've changed the neural pathways, I'm no longer associating these feelings with that desire to look at porn. And I think that's what kind of happened for people, is that once you do go beyond compulsion and, you know, you learn how to change those neural pathways, you realize that actually that discomfort is still going to be there from time to time, but now you don't have a label on it. And I used to have the label on it all the time of, I'm wanting to engage my compulsive behaviour. Like at first, it's like that discomfort was so strongly associated with porn because, you know, throughout my childhood, it was essentially feel discomfort, look at porn. That was the pattern in my brain. That was just going on. And so I now had a label on the discomfort of, okay, I'm wanting to look at porn, right? And then I guess through this method, it's like I've disconnected those neural pathways, and now it's just discomfort. And maybe that's going to be associated with something else. And maybe it's like, what is going on here? And sometimes I don't know. And I'm like, well, you know, I feel uncomfortable. And that's life, as is life. And I think accepting that as a human being, you are going to have discomfort, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you don't always need to resist it, is a really, really powerful thing to do. And And I think a lot of people would be a lot happier if they did have that perspective on discomfort.
I love that. I love that. And I think, going back to sort of Buddhist philosophy, the Buddha, an enlightened being, said one of the main truths of life is that suffering exists.
Yeah.
Like, full stop. And it's like, if that is a truth of life, then us trying to change it or say that that shouldn't be the case is inherently also bringing us suffering.
Yeah.
And one of my very good spiritual friends, who also has a YouTube, he's called Simon Brown, he said this amazing quote that I think about a lot, which is, very early on in our lives, we made a fundamental error in judgment. It's a mistake that we carry through all of our lives, and that is that we think that we shouldn't suffer. Or we think that there's a point in our lives where we won't suffer. And if we are suffering, we're doing something wrong because we should have gotten over it. And it's like just bringing this easefulness that you're also talking about over, it's a feeling. And if this feeling is what it means to be human, and it doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong and it shouldn't be there, if we can let that go, I think this is, you asked me how to sit with difficult feelings. When I sit with a difficult feeling, I don't think I've done anything wrong to feel this. I think this is what it means to be human. And in a way, that's beautiful. Yeah.
And I think final thing, and then we'll wrap up, is I think it can be really, really useful to have conversations with other people where you are vulnerable and honest and talk about your feelings, because it's through doing the Samaritans volunteering where people call up and they're in a state where often they are thinking about ending their life. Like, that, first of all, taught me so deeply that humans suffer. Humans have emotions. It's normal to feel really bad at times. Now, to the level of wanting to end your life, maybe not, but again, a lot of callers actually, they're not necessarily thinking about ending their life, and you're really just hearing how they're feeling. That's what it's about. And then, I'm sure you'll be able to resonate with this, but again, with the Buddhist Centre, you talk in a group at the Buddhist Centre and people will just share, honestly, how has their week been? How are they feeling? What's going on for them? And I think hearing those stories of, this week's been really hard, been really stressed out, felt really lonely, whatever it is, hearing that can make you realise, oh yeah, that person is just a human being. And the feelings that I have, that's just me being a human being. There's nothing wrong with feeling all this discomfort from time to time. I mean, it depends how often you're feeling that discomfort. I think, if at a certain level, especially if you're in addiction, it's like, if you're feeling discomfort all the time, why not find a way to deal with that discomfort and change it? It's like it's possible. But just knowing that, you're a human being. Some days are going to be good. Some days are going to be bad. Can really be quite useful, actually.
And you're allowed to feel all the range of emotions. You don't just have to be happy all the time. And I think it's really important to be around people where you're safe enough to share how you actually are. And you're right that in hearing other people be vulnerable, I think in our society, you can think everyone is having a great time. Social media is so bad for this. In unrealistic standards, fake lives, people only share their highlights. And the fact that people aren't honest, people only have sort of surface level conversations. You don't know what's going on in people's lives, so you can feel like you're doing something really wrong by struggling with something. And it's beautiful when you can have those networks of honesty, of truth, and you can feel part of something bigger than you, that everyone's suffering, which they are. It's just about whether they're talking about it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we'll wrap it up there. Where can people find you, Emma?
So I've recently started an Instagram and TikTok called Space to Feel with Emma. And sometime in the next few months, I think I'll be starting my own podcast as well.
Awesome.
Which, I'd love to have you on as well and to have more conversations.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really, really appreciate it. I'm sure there's going to be tons of stuff within this podcast where people will, hear you talk about your life and your perspective on things and really resonate and hopefully have some insights for themselves which can make their lives better. So I feel like it's been really meaningful. Really appreciate you. And I've just really enjoyed it as well. So thanks again. And thanks to anyone listening or watching. Hope you've enjoyed it as well. That's one of the main things. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.